Hello, good morning, everyone. This is Abdul Char from Galaxy Commercial Limited. I'm very pleased to be back in front of you this morning to discuss the topic we've been discussing over the past year and a half, 2 years, which is the issue of cashew processing on the African continent. We were trying to understand as the reason why cashew processing hasn't picked up on the African continent. We discussed a number of issues, hurdles on the road to success with respect to cashew processing. As we all know, especially those been following us, um, Africa is the leader or one of the leader in terms of cashew production, raw cashew nut production. Over the past few years, various governments on the African continent have tried to go into processing, the industrialization of the cashew industry, because we all agree that for the continent to benefit from its raw commodities, they need to be processed locally. Because so far, what Africa does, she produces raw cashew nuts and exports it to some Asian country for processing, and then the final product, the finished product, will come back to the EU, to the US, to Canada, and various countries across the world. And the continent does not really benefit, because in order to benefit from your commodities, they need to be processed for their value addition. But Africa does not add value, because what tend to happen is the commodity will be exported raw onto other continents, and they will process it, get the finished product, and make the most of it. And what we've noticed recently is that many various African countries have started to look into processing, which is a new industry, relatively new to Africa. And so we wanted to understand why it hasn't picked up, why it's not going the way it should be going, and hopefully come up with some solutions, some ideas in order to fit into the debate and give our intakes, which hopefully could be helpful to some African government or African decision makers in order to make cashew processing a success on the African continent. Okay, before I carry on, the reason why I'm making the video today is because recently I've been reading in the press many stories about bankruptcies, factory bankruptcies on the African continent, which is quite interesting. Why is it interesting? Because these were major factories on the African continent, and I'm going to speak about only two countries since they're the major producer on the African continent. The first is Ivory Coast or Cote d'Ivoire, which is the world leader in terms of production. Ivory Coast is producing now over 1 million ton of raw cashew nuts. So it is a major, Ivory Coast is a major player on the African continent. And then the neighbor country, Ghana, also play a very important role on the African continent. In those two countries, recently I've read that some major player in the processing industry, unfortunately, have filed for bankruptcy. In Ivory Coast, you have the case of Casa. Casa employ more than 1,000 people in the Ivory Coast. There's also recently the case of FM Industry, which also was a major player in Ivory Coast. Unfortunately, they have to shut down. Beside Ivory Coast, we're going to look at another important African country, which is doing a lot of effort to process its raw material, its raw cashew nuts, which is the country of Ghana. Okay, in Ghana also a major player in the cashew industry in terms of processing filed for bankruptcy a few months ago. It's a company called Cashew. Cashew employ thousands of people in the factories. Unfortunately, they had to shut down as well. or they're trying to. I read recently that they're trying to come back with the support of the government of Ghana. I hope that they get the support that they need in order to open again. Why? Because Mim Cashew were employing a lot of Ghanaian, and I think that's one of the reasons why the government really need to support the industry, because they helped to create jobs, employ thousands of people in the country, and it's very good for the economy. Okay, so I'm going to, for those that are new to our channel who are looking at our videos for the first time, I'm going to summarize some of the key issues we discussed over the past year or two, that we discussed in our previous videos. Okay, what are the obstacles to the issue of cashew processing? Why cashew processing is not picking up in Africa? I said in one of my previous videos that Vietnam became the leader over only 2 decades. Within 25 years, Vietnam managed to not only harness the art of processing, have a good expertise in the processing of cashew. They even overtook India, which used to be the leader in cashew processing. Why can Africa not do the same thing? And we're going to try to understand why that is the case. First, we discussed the issue of policy. In order to Africa to become an important player in the industry of processing, there need to be clear policy from those African government. Okay, policy is very important. Have a vision, have a policy, clear policy in place that will support the industry and the emerging industry on the continent. Unless that is clear, it's going to be very difficult to attain success and get the result that the continent is looking for. The other thing we'll discuss is the lack of proper infrastructure. Okay, there needs to be more investment by the African continent into infrastructure to support the industry, because without roads it's difficult to move around, it's difficult to move raw material, it's difficult for the industry to operate, for the factory to operate. Okay, there need to be electricity. No industry can function without electricity, proper electricity, and if there's no proper electricity, it cannot happen. If electricity is too expensive, also that's also a problem. Okay, in Nigeria, which is the largest economy in Africa, Nigeria has a serious electricity issue. A friend of mine was telling me that in Nigeria, it's very difficult to run a cashew processing factory, just because there's the issue of electricity is too acute in Nigeria. You need to have a generator. That's a must if you want to run a factory, because the power cut is very frequent in Nigeria. Unless you have a generator, you cannot function. So this little thing can play a really important role in developing cashew processing on the African continent. Infrastructure needs to be fixed. Okay, there need to be more investment by those African government. Given what the continent will get in return, I think it's worth investing a lot in infrastructure to support that industry. The other thing we discuss also is technology. Most of the equipment required to run cashew factory will be imported from Asian countries, and that Africa needs to develop its own equipment to develop an industry will help produce those equipment locally. Why not? Even if it doesn't happen immediately, it's something that could be planned over the long term. Invest to produce your own equipment locally can be done. In Ivory Coast, I've seen some research center looking at ways to produce cashew processing equipment in Ivory Coast. I think it's those kind of initiatives that need to be encouraged and supported. Okay. The other thing we looked at also is the the training part of it, because once you have this imported equipment, people have to be able to use it. You need to have the right stuff to use those equipment, and training sometimes is lacking. You have some expert or consultant from Asia who come to train African staff to use those equipment. So technology is something that the continent has to look at. The other thing we looked at was the running costs of those factories. In order to be competitive, Africa has to manage properly the running costs of those factories in order to be competitive, because the running costs in Asian countries is very competitive. Unless African can address that, it's going to be difficult for African processing factories to compete with their Asian counterpart. The other thing that the continent need to work on is marketing. The Made in Africa cashew kernel. The two brands that are well known across the world are the Indian brand and the Vietnamese brand. For Africa to become an important actor, Africa has to invest in its marketing and promote the brand Made in Africa in order to compete. Africa's brand also has to invest in certification, whether it's ISO or Global Gap or whatever certification there is. African processors has to be able to invest in those certifications in order to gain access to the US market, to the EU market, to the Middle East market, to some really important market, even in Canada. So Africa has to invest in certifications. Very important. The other thing we discussed also was the issue of finance. Accessibility to finance was a problem on the continent. Either they couldn't access finance on the continent because the bank were not lending money, or the rate at which they're lending money was too expensive. And because it was expensive, they couldn't compete again with the competitor in Asia. And one thing that was really, really interesting in the report that we read recently, when the media announced the bankruptcy of those African factories, was the fact that they couldn't access raw material. That's really interesting. Here's a continent which produces over a million. Altogether, it's over a million, because Ivory Coast itself produces 1 million ton of raw cashew nuts. So if you add Ghana, Benin, Mali, Burkina Faso, Mozambique, Tanzania, Kenya, all those countries, Africa is way over 1 million ton of raw cashew nuts. And even the continent produces so much raw material, factories are going bust because they have no access to raw material to feed the industry. It's really, really, really something that needs to be looked into, and government have to understand why that is the case. There are certain countries like Mozambique, which in order to ensure that local factories can have access to raw material, the first part of the cashew campaign, nobody's allowed to export raw material. So the local processor can will be given priority in buying raw material for the factories, and after that happen, then people are allowed to export the remaining lots abroad. I think that's a good initiative that other African countries can learn from. But in Ivory Coast, for example, in Ghana as well, the factories couldn't access raw material, and that's one of the reasons why they had to shut down, and that's really unfortunate. How could you produce so much cashew but close down because you don't have access to raw material? It just doesn't make sense. It's quite absurd, but unfortunately, that's the situation. The other thing that Africa has to look at, that's probably policies, is to look at the presence of Asian processes. I'm not against foreign investment in Africa, and I think it need to be encouraged because it helps to boost the African economy. That's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But at the same time, it has to be regulated in some ways so that those Asians who come into Africa to buy raw material do not become a problem, because there's a competition issue between them and the local processors. And if they're allowed to come in and operate freely, then the local processor in Africa will have difficulty in gaining access to raw material. And that's business. They are defending their interest. They need to stay competitive. They need to stay alive as a business, as a companies. So of course they will try to get raw material for themselves in order to supply their factories back in Asia. But at the same time, whatever they can do to undermine also the local processor in Africa, I think they will do that. And so that's something that Africa has to look into. Again, I'm just a disclaimer. I'm not saying that Asian processor should not be allowed in the African continent. I'm only saying that there need to be a kind of regulation so that the African processor are not undermined. Okay, so these are the key things that we discussed, and this is what we've seen recently in the media regarding those factories. It's really sad for the continent, which is trying to build an industry in terms of processing. But the first few factories who started, unfortunately, had to shut down, has to file for bankruptcy because they could not gain access to raw material. There are other reasons like finance. They couldn't get access to finance. The COVID-19 pandemic didn't help. The cost of running those factories, the wages, the lack of infrastructure, the cost of those things that are required to run the factory, like water, electricity. All of those things contributed, unfortunately, to their demise. And we hope that they will get some will get support from government to stay alive. Unfortunately, there will be some casualties. And it's sad to read that Casa, a very promising factory, FM industry, again, not a promising factory. All of those factories have to shut down or file for bankruptcy because the business wasn't viable any longer. Okay, that's all for today. We will probably come back soon for our next video. Thank you for watching, and also to support the channel. If you can share to the people you feel might be interested in the topic, you can share, leave a comment as well. Thank you again for your time this morning, and we will speak next time. Bye.